Hey class, in this video we're going to be importing our media assets to get started on our project. We're going to create our first composition and we're going to rearrange our layers. Let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is import those assets, the video file, the audio, and the text to our project. To do that, there's about 3 different ways you can do it. First, I'm going to go to my project panel and I can double click an empty space, and that will allow me to import my files here. I could also go to File and Import and choose either File or Multiple Files. I can also right click in my project folder and import as well. So I'm going to do that right now. So I'm just going to select File because each of our media files are slightly different. So the first one I'm going to import is actually the video file of the cat on the green screen. I'm going to import it as footage and just hit open. And so here you can see in my project window I have a little preview of my little cat video here. Next, I'm going to double click in empty space. And let's import our audio. So that's the waltz for a cat. This one is an MP3 or it could be a wave, and just hit open. And then finally we're going to import the text. So that's the text Photoshop file. Now this one is a little different. So if it was footage, that would be similar to a video file. It would flatten all of the layers inside the Photoshop file. So that's something I don't want. Instead, what I'm going to do is just select composition and actually retain layer sizes. And we can hit open. It's going to ask me, do I want editable layer styles? Or do I want to merge my layers into footage? And I want to keep my layers editable, so let's select that. Perfect. All right, so now you'll notice that when this came in, because this is a Photoshop file with multiple layers on it, it came in both as a composition, so this is the composition here, or as text layers that we could drag in individually. So this is the background and this is the actual text. The next thing to note is that this project panel over here can be organized. So I can right click and add a new folder or add a folder on the bottom here to create a new folder. And I can call this media assets. But sometimes you'll want to organize this into separate pieces like text assets, video assets, audio assets, etc. So I can keep this nice and organized. Also, these files that we're seeing here, like the text and the text layers, are linked. So they're not actually saved in your project folder like they would be if you were embedding them into a Photoshop file. Instead, these are linked. If you move your files, so for instance, if I go to my media folder and drag this video outside of that and put it into the main folder, After Effects won't be able to find that missing link. Instead, what you'll need to do is relink them. So you'll go to File, Dependencies, and find Missing Footage. Or you can just put the files back where they belong. So note that if you go from computer to computer, sometimes this will cause an issue as well. So definitely organizing your files and then adding those dependencies back in will be very helpful. Let's see. There we go. Cool. All right, so they've been relinked. All right, so let's get started working on our compositions. So you can see here in our composition window that we have a few options. The first option is for a new composition, which enables us to create a blank composition where we have where we get to choose all of our particular settings. The other setting is new composition for footage. This can be helpful if you're just trying to match the original footage. For us, let's choose new composition and take a look at our settings. So the most important thing here is the composition name. I'm going to call this main comp and week 1 cat. For preset, we have a few options. So there's 2 pieces to the preset puzzle. First is the actual size. So 1920 by 1080 pixels is the size of our original footage, and that's HD. There's 4K, which our monitors are, but our original footage is the smaller size, so scaling it up at this point isn't going to get us a lot. The next piece of our preset puzzle is the frame rate. So there's many different frame rates that we'll be using throughout this class. Traditional animation is typically 24 frames per second. Broadcast resolution is 29.97 frames per second, and that's because black and white footage was broadcast at 30 frames per second, and then in order to not interfere with broadcast black and white footage, the color footage was introduced at a slightly different frame rate so that it didn't interfere with the signal. YouTube these days is 30 frames per second, so you'll see that quite a bit, and it can actually go up to 60 frames per second, I believe. So initially this is Social Media Portrait HD, and that's portrait, so it's scaled slightly differently. Ours is technically the Social Media Landscape, 1920 by 1080, 30 frames per second. Or we could use the broadcast. I'm just going to go with this Social Media Landscape because it is actually fitting our original footage and it's the correct size. So I'm going to hit OK, or just click off of that. So again, you can also adjust the size here individually, the width and the height. Pixel aspect ratio, if you're doing something international on NTSC, or sorry, PAL, you may want to adjust this, but for 99.99% of us, we're just going to use square pixels. We can also individually adjust the frame rate here or choose from a preset. Resolution is actually resolution preview, so this can be changed at a later date when you're actually exporting. Right now I'm going to select half, and then we'll switch this back to full when we get to exporting or rendering. Finally, for our time codes, we want to select duration. So there's a lot of zeros here. What these mean is the first 0 is for hours, the second double 0 is for minutes, then seconds, and then these last 2 zeros are for frames. So hours, minutes, seconds, frames. So this is set to 15 seconds, and we can always change the duration later in our timeline. Finally, the last thing is our background color. Now, this background color is actually an alpha, so it's just a color that's going to fill in the background to start, but it won't render out. So you could make this any color you like by clicking on this little eyedropper, or you can double click and open up the color picker. Okay, and now we can hit OK. Great, so you can see here in our composition window, we have our composition, main comp, week 1 cat. We can scale this to fit our window, which can be really helpful, or we can scale it up so we can zoom in, or scale it down to zoom out. Now let's add our media assets to our composition so we can see what we're working with here. So the first thing I'm going to do is add my video footage. So I'm just going to click it from my project panel down to my timeline panel. Great. And here's where you can see you can zoom in and out. I'm also going to be adding my audio music. So let's click that and drag it down. And then finally, my text. So I'm actually going to select the whole text composition. It does look a little weird. I'm just going to re-import this because it has gone a bit weird. And double click in the project panel. Let's go to text, import as, composition, retain layer sizes, hit OK. Editable layer styles, okay. All right. And now I'm going to add this composition into my timeline, and you can see where I'm trying to drop it is what level it's at. So if it's at the back or if it's at the front. We can reorder these layers at any time by clicking and dragging on them. So I'm going to have my text layer at the back. I'm actually going to have my cat, which is on a green screen, so we'll be adding an effect so we can see our cat. And then the audio, I generally just leave it at the bottom. So reordering layers is super simple. You just click and drag on them until you're happy with their order. All right, so let's move on to the next video. In quick summary, in this video, we created our first composition. We added our media to our composition. We set our preview resolution, and we also set our composition size and frame rate. In the next video, we'll be adding an effect or using an effect so that we can remove this green screen, and we'll be working with our text. All right, thanks class.